I'm going to, now I need to record it. Okay, we are good to go.
All righty. Well, I will call the meeting to order at 5:06 p.m. We didn't have any call-ins, did we, that we know of?
No. Nope.
Okay. All righty. Does everyone want to take a minute just to review the norms? It's been a while.
I was going to suggest, I asked Sue to come on just to go over the FY20 year-end summary. So I was going to ask the board if you were comfortable swapping that, sure, putting that first so that she could leave, and then we could have a discussion if you wanted about anything related to kind of our COVID-19 situation.
Okay.
You comfortable? Everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
All right.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so
hold on, actually, Sue, the next thing is to approve minutes.
oh, sorry, I thought we were skipping.
I just meant for the report of the assistant superintendent of schools to just swap that. I was just trying to do that at the beginning of the meeting, but.
All right. So are we just skipping the norms, jumping to the minutes?
I thought you said to review them, but I didn't know you wanted to have them go over it. Sorry, I was confused.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're just having people review them on their own.
Yeah. Okay. So should we proceed to the minutes? Okay. Sorry. It's much easier when we're all in person, isn't it? Okay. So we've got the February 11th minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any discussion? Any amendments? No? Okay. So let's move to approve them as written. Do we need to revote or are we good to go? Randy?
I think you should vote and
Okay.
just approve them.
Okay, so as written, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. March 17th minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any amendments? No. Motion to approve as written. I'll move. Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to like capture some of this on my phone. So there's some. Dean, are you taking notes on this?
I am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then I'm not going to worry about it. Right, good. So,
Okay.
So we have two kind of primary topics to talk about, and so I just requested that we have Sue share any information. The FY20 year-end summary is pretty basic and self-explanatory, but I wanted her to just point out some highlights and answer any questions you might have before we move on to the next item.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to be most likely in a little bit of a deficit at the end of the year. We were originally predicting a small surplus, so now we're predicting a little bit of a deficit. We had some additional secondary service costs that we weren't aware of at the time that we finalized the budget. And
can I just interrupt?
Sure.
What does that mean? Like, how are they defined?
Yep. So if you go to packet page 9,
Okay.
under the instructional program, you can see where the variances are. And the biggest one there is just basically instructional services. And those are additional services that were charged from BBA for instructional services that are provided to students. And we were not aware that we were being billed for any of this. BBA was a little late in getting bills to us this year on a lot of kids, especially second semester. So that's where I think we're going to land. It's not final because believe it or not, even though we're so close to the end of the school year, it's only the beginning of June, and sometimes this stuff still has to come out in the wash as far as what services kids were getting, and we don't always have all the bills.
During COVID-19, were instructional services still provided to all the students?
Yeah.
And is the 16 and change, is that just based on, I mean, is that COVID related or independent of it?
Nope, this is independent of it, and services that were being received probably, I don't know, I wouldn't say that all of them are going to go back all the way to the beginning of the year. My guess is it's probably sometime in the fall or early winter where services probably began. And just because BBA bills us twice a year, and they most likely just didn't catch up with the services on these individual students until February.
What is instructional services?
So these are services that are provided to students on individual plans. They're regular ed students. Randy could probably provide a little more background on the specific services that are being provided to students than I could. You want to jump in, Randy?
Can be a wide range of things. It would be often be students who are on a 504 plan who might require some academic services or counseling services. There's students who have disabilities but don't qualify for special ed services. And but in their 504 plan, they have a level of service that has a cost associated with it.
And when we move forward, is this what's going to be, I guess, is this going to be kind of a regular cost to us? Or I thought there was legislation that was kind of capping or kind of the special ed services. Can you explain that a little bit? I'm still a little fuzzy on it.
Well, this is not special ed, it's general education. So it doesn't fall under Act 173, which is, I think, what you're referring to. The legislature, I think, just bumped that out another year. So right now we're not looking at that going into effect until FY22.
Okay.
So it's even further out than the first time it was delayed. But this is independent of any funding related to that.
And why is it billed back to the BRSU versus individual out of pocket?
It's billed directly to the district.
So these are Winhall students, gen ed costs for Winhall students that are being billed to you as the Winhall School District.
Right, but I'm trying to understand if they're not under special ed, then what, they're just additional services. So who decides the amount that these students need the additional services?
A student's 504 team develops their 504 plan. If there are services associated with that, then we receive invoices for the services from the schools that are providing that service.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And then the line below, like, what are services? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so this is the same thing. The first line is instructional, the second line is support, and
Okay.
they're separated simply because of how we have to code them. So as Randy mentioned, some students may receive counseling services in their plan, so that would be the support line item.
Okay, thank you.
And then if you go back a page to packet page, 2 pages, excuse me, to packet page 7, the other big item here that's producing the deficit is almost to the bottom, you see 3,400 other state grants. And we had projected receiving money that we are now not going to receive. This is a student who was on our rolls as being state placed, and we don't have to pay for tuition for a state placed student. We just found out actually in March that this student was no longer state placed and was adopted. So that means they actually are a Winhall student. So we won't receive the reimbursement from the state for that student. So that's an offset revenue.
Okay.
So Celeste and I talked about how to perhaps do a better job on trying to hound DCF to get the right information, because we don't generally get good updates from either the state or DCF when it comes to these students. And we do have, a few of them scattered throughout the districts. And it does cause, financial changes. Just one student can be a big change when we don't have good and accurate information. So we're going to try to do a better job, stay on top of that next year if we can. It's only as good as the information we can get from DCF. So
And we are too. I know Director of Student Services are constantly trying to work with DCF to improve communication so that we're made aware of changes in a timely manner.
Yeah, the difficulty is that DCF doesn't understand what the financial implications are to us. So, they're focused on the kids and making sure the kids are getting to the right place and all of that, but it does have a trickle down effect, and it's tough to get that across to them. So So on packet page 8, I just gave you a quick little blurb about what we just talked about, that we anticipated a surplus of 4710. Right now we're anticipating a deficit of 21.8. And so that brings it's an unfavorable variance overall of 26. But it's really just those couple of things that are pushing the surplus back to a deficit. Again, this isn't final, but hopefully we won't move too much more in another, couple of months when we have year end all wrapped up.
So, well, and actually on page 8,
Mhm.
I was trying to understand the second line from the bottom where it says reserve transfer voted March 2019 and added in an additional $100,000. So anticipated balance as of June 30th is 250,765. Is that, we have that much left in the tax stabilization fund?
As of the end of this year, right? So for FY20, last year, we voted to appropriate that extra $100,000 and transfer it into tax stabilization. So that's where we plan to end the year. And then next year's budget, we plan to draw a little bit from that.
Okay. So based on what we already passed at town meeting, so
Yes.
we're drawing that. And then are we also going to have to draw this $23,000 or $21,000?
Right. So that all depends on what next year looks like, right? So when we're preparing,
Right.
if we ended the year with a $21,000 deficit, we will roll that into next year's budget projections, and we're going to try to raise that money. And we will raise that money, but we're also going to be looking at what are next year's actual revenues and expenditures, and we don't know what that is yet. So we can't really say whether we'll need to borrow from tax or transfer from tax stabilization to cover that deficit, because we don't know what things will look like yet next year. We'll have to wait.
Like if we ended up with fewer students than we had budgeted for, then we would be under budget and would have the money to pay for that shortage. But if we have more students than we anticipated, then we're going to have to cover that plus the 21,000.
Yes, but then the last piece of that is always our tax rate calculation. So even regardless of which direction that goes, it all depends on how the tax rate calculation is, what the yield is. We want to stay out of penalty. We want to try to keep that tax rate stable. So even if we were adding the deficit in, even if we had to add the deficit in, if we got more kids, may turn out that due to the increase in our equalized pupils because of the additional kids that we have this year, and then what we're proposing might happen next year, we could end up, and depending upon what they set the yield at, we could end up out of penalty. And if we end up out of penalty, even if we raise that deficit, doesn't mean we have to borrow from tax stabilization. So there's so many factors at play. We sort of have to wait until all that comes together before we know what's going to happen to the tax stabilization fund.
Okay. Yeah, and last I checked, I think the property yield is getting voted on tomorrow.
Oh, that would be lovely. Let's hope it's where they last landed. I think they landed at around $100 more than they were originally proposing. That would be nice. So any other questions?
I don't think so. I didn't have any more. Dean or Meredith, do you all have any other questions?
Good.
No, it's going to be about the projections for next year. So I kind of want to leave this budget and last year's budget. I have no questions on last year's budget.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Sue.
sure. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
too.
So we, so when Jennifer and I were planning the budget, we thought that it was likely that you would want to touch base about what's going on with COVID-19.
Or planning the agenda.
Yeah, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. So, we wanted to allow some time for this. I don't know if you want to set sort of a time parameter on it or you just want to have an open conversation, but there's not really a lot to say because there's so much that we don't know, but we want to allow some space for conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you all have things you want to discuss, but does 10 minutes sound like a good time to allocate to this?
I would probably allocate 10 to 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more, based on what I'm seeing and what I kind of want to discuss.
Okay. 15?
Yeah.
Dean, is
10.
that good with you?
15 is fine.
Okay. All right, Randy, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a tremendous amount of unknown. projections are the ed fund has a very significant deficit, upwards of $150 million or less. So, we're most districts at this point, you are in a very different situation than pretty much every other district in the state. So the challenges that you're going to face are going to be very different than what other districts are facing, because most budgets are paying for teachers and salaries and benefits. And so when you've got that significant reduction in funds coming in, it's going to impact what you can pay for. You are facing unknown move-ins, basically, right? Your biggest variable is the unknown about people coming in to claim residency and seek tuition reimbursement. So that's the unknown factor for you. That's a much bigger factor than what other operating districts are facing.
Randy, do you have a sense of how many people have called to inquire at the BRSU?
I don't have a sense of inquiry. If I was thinking that probably something I can offer you is, every 4 weeks or so, I could let you know what we've got as far as enrollment goes. We don't typically start seeing that until July, August. I think that all of the parameters that you put in place 2 years ago are going to help you, driver's license, homestead, all these requirements that are above and beyond for Winhall will help, because there will be people who are not prepared for that, nor are they necessarily willing to, and they're going to have to face that when they get here. So I think that's a worthwhile factor to see how that plays into the whole thing too.
Jen, one thing that may be helpful is if you would reach out to the schools and see what their interest level has been. I know from a personal standpoint, I had 4 families reach out to me today alone about moving.
Yeah, anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of families calling schools and a lot of people looking to move to the area.
And so my question is, originally we had kind of worked with the schools 2 years ago to establish quotas. And I'm curious if they're going to stick to those quotas or not. And so part of it is,
but we can't do anything. I mean, they can do it.
It's not that we can do anything, but we can work with them, because there was a quota that was established 2 years ago that was 48 students for Maple Street and so.
Right, but that's on them to uphold that.
100%. But I think that giving them some guidance during this time would be
Not something that we would do as a board.
No, it's not something that we would do as a board, but it is something that we discussed last time.
Right,
where
so if we're not going to do it as a board, then I don't think that we need to have a discussion about it.
But I do think we should do something as a board. There's so many families moving in, and I do think that something should be done, because if we don't do anything, our tax rate, we're going to be in a worse position next year than we've ever been from
Right, so we can't do anything about enforcing quotas.
I'm not asking you to do anything about enforcing quotas. I'm asking you to have a discussion of what we can do.
Meredith, I think, maybe what would make sense, because, the schools are going to do what they're going to do. And certainly if families are choosing public schools, I mean, that's the end of the conversation. But I think what would be helpful is to remind people that we had a board meeting tonight, and to provide them, maybe Emily Schriebel can send out the link to tonight's meeting where we're discussing what's happening with our tax rate and the implications of having more people educating their students and, from Winhall than we had anticipated at town meeting. And I think,
but I also think a discussion of what happens when our tax rate goes up, and some of our historical precedent of that, our townspeople get very, very, very upset. And what tends to happen is that school choice becomes a very, very contentious debate. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is, understanding that we are limited, is to somehow mitigate that contentious debate, so we're not in the hot seat every 2 years like we have been historically.
well, the other thing to keep in mind is I would not be surprised if our tax rate goes up because we have additional families moving in. But I also wouldn't be surprised if tax rates across Vermont go up because of the educational crisis and the shortage in the educational fund.
But
So-
also another thing that we could discuss is with the select board to understand that if all these families are moving in, it may be time to do a reappraisal of real estate.
Yeah, but we can't do that.
No,
They can
I'm
do
not
that.
saying that we can do it, Dean. I'm simply saying that anything that impacts the Winhall tax rate, which is, from my understanding, cost per actualized pupil, is impacted by the value that's put on, on our real estate. That's one of the impacts. If we ask for, it's something we had discussed 2 years ago. So anything to mitigate our taxes from going up, I think would be welcomed and appreciated. I'm not saying it's within, I'm just trying to think a little bit outside of the box. So we don't have the same situation that we had 2 years ago, which was contentious and unpleasant for everybody. You pitted townsperson against townsperson. It was awful.
Anytime tax rates go up, you're going to have that. That's just going to happen. It's been happening here for, since as long as I've been here. So we can do everything we can to mitigate that. But, what we have to do is, I agree with you in the sense that we have to make sure that everyone is prepared for what's coming. We do still have $250,000 in the tax stabilization fund. So even if we do get an influx of unanticipated enrollment, that doesn't mean that the tax rate is necessarily going to go up drastically. I agree with Jen. I think it's probably going to go up, but I also agree with Jen that I think everyone's tax rates are going to go up. We are fortunate that we have a stabilization fund to help offset that. But I can tell you right now that people know what's coming. I mean, maybe not everyone, but I've had enough people come to me and say, do you know how many people are moving here and how much our enrollment's going to go up? And, preliminary, just from talking to Beth and, Tim and Robin Apps, I'm right now looking at at least 50 families that are thinking about it.
Or 50 kids. I heard 50
I don't know about, it might be 50 kids. Beth said that she thought she had handed out around 50 of the documents that people had requested in order to enroll. That's just hearsay though. I don't know. She was just guessing.
Then the other question that I have is, I hear a lot of people are hedging. So they're going to apply to the school, they're going to pay the deposit, and if they open the schools in New York or New Jersey or wherever, they're going to pull them out. What happens if they get pulled out of our school? Are we then responsible for, and they don't,
we just pay every day that there's a child who's a child of a Winhall resident in a school. So if someone moves into the area November 13th, we start paying November 13th or 14th, 13th.
It's going to be the residency that is going to either
Yeah.
hopefully work to our favor, because if people are hedging their bets and they're not sure, they're probably not going to jump through all the hoops to establish residency properly, like filing a homestead, etc. In order to do that. So that might work to our advantage, but we can't know for sure how many of these people that are considering it are actually going to go through with it. But I think the important thing for us at this point is that we're just all aware of it. We're having a conversation about it, and we have a plan going forward to address, the voters if we need to, and say, listen, we're going to have a problem.
I think we can do more. Is what I'm saying is, I think that I understand that it's wonderful that we're all aware of it. I think it is definitely coming, but I think there may be more that we can do as a board to address the situation. And so I'd like to consider what some of those options may be.
But see, Meredith, we're constrained by the statute. There's not a whole lot of thinking outside the box of the statute that we can do. We can add additional documentation for residency. That's one thing we could do. That is within the statute. But do we, I mean, are you seeing a shortcoming in the paperwork that we currently have in place? I mean, is there an articulated?
I don't know. It was kind of a discussion that I wanted to have to make it a little bit harder for people. The conversation that I had today was disturbing because one of the families was like, well, we want to hedge, we want to move up there, but we don't really want to stay. And my problem is that there's several families that are contemplating moving up for a short period of time that are going to wreak havoc on our tax rate. And
I don't agree with that because you can only have one domicile at a time. It can only be in one place at a time. And there are indicia of, you know, where's your driver's license, where are your bank accounts?
you can have one domicile and your husband can have one domicile. As a family, you can have two homesteads. So your wife can declare homestead up here and you could declare homestead in New York and you can have two homesteads.
Okay. But again, as far as hedging their bets, like say that they move here and they send their kids to school for 2 weeks and then they decide to go to New York. Like we are only responsible for paying for those 2 weeks that those kids were in the.
What I'm saying is that there's the issue that I have is that you have, it is very easy to establish homestead up here.
Well, we've made it significantly more difficult.
Well,
to
it was
establish.
beyond, it was ridiculously, I mean, yes,
Well,
I
the
would
point
agree.
isn't to make people jump through hoops. The point is to assure ourselves that people who are requesting tuition reimbursement are legitimately residents. And as long as someone is a resident, that is the beginning and the end of our inquiry.
100%. But what defines a resident?
The statute.
Right.
So there are indicia of residency that we have requested for people to provide with their request for tuition.
Right. I'm interested to find out if other school districts like Stowe or Killington or some of the other ski resorts are experiencing the same issues and whether their school districts are also expanding their residency and addressing residency.
Okay, so I don't understand what that has to do with this board.
Because this is exactly what happened 2 years ago when I had requested that we add driver's license for proof of residency. And you guys said, or certain people on the board were reticent to do it. And then I said, look, Stowe, Killington, this district, every other district that's in a similar situation has the following requirements. So all I'm asking is, are we up to date in kind of understanding what residency requirements are? Are other school districts looking at residency as an issue? And maybe we should just consider looking at it again. I'm not saying I know what it is. I'm simply saying I want to be up to date. If other districts are looking at residency because people are moving in, I think we should just be open to the idea to reevaluate it.
Okay, so when you say looking at residency, what exactly do you mean?
Looking at additional requirements like we did 2 years ago for residency requirements. So 2 years ago, we added the Vermont license, which we never had before. We added homestead. We added the fact that we had to ask for residency every year. That was something that we never did. And so the way that we came to that understanding was that we evaluated other school districts and what they were requesting. And we went back and looked at the documentation that we requested for residency and we amended it accordingly. I'm asking that in this time of COVID, when we have so many people considering moving into our district, that we are just up to date and we look at what other school districts are doing to make sure we are adding the appropriate residency requirements.
So do you feel that our current residency requirements are inadequate?
I feel that our current residency requirements are perfectly fine pre-COVID. I don't know if they are adequate.
Residency is residency whether there's COVID or not. That's what I don't understand about what you're trying to say.
And let me just say, we've got like a minute left that we've allocated. Do we want to delegate to Meredith the idea of checking out other independent school districts to see what they're
doing
request forms look like?
Sure, yeah. If I move that we empower Meredith to reach out to these other districts and find out what their residency requirements are and if they're changing them in response to COVID.
Okay. And then, what we can do is we can look at, the documentation that's being required. But I mean, Dean is right. Residency is residency and COVID has nothing to do with it. But, if we want to, look at our other schools requiring 3 documents instead of 2, okay. But, like either someone's going to be able to demonstrate residency or they're not.
100%, but making it that much harder makes people maybe second guess, or maybe say, you know what, I'm really only going to be up here. I don't really know if I'm really want to do this. Making it a little bit more challenging for somebody to declare residency. I think in the end, you'll wind up, if you want to declare residency, you're going to do it. If you want to move here, you're going to do it. If you're contemplating and on the fence and it's that much harder, maybe you won't do it.
Okay. So Dean, did you move?
I did.
Okay, I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. This is what it means to have a board meeting from your house.
I think the dog was just voting as well. Just wanted us to know it.
Thought he was a voting member. Okay, so I guess next is up to you, Jennifer. Board updates.
Okay. I don't have any board updates. Anyone else?
No.
Okay. Any agenda items for the next meeting? Shall we?
I'm sure residency.
Yeah. Shall we review the residency forms from other districts?
And review. You're going to want to review our residency and the list of folks who've moved into Winhall, the residents of Winhall.
Okay.
Hey, Jen, when we were working with the schools last time, was it Emily who worked with the quotas? How did we get this 48 number from like Maple Street and stuff like that? How did that go down? I can't quite remember.
I know Emily did do an awful lot of the community committee. I know that Peter was at those meetings. I think Fanning was at those meetings. And I think it was an educational, journey for those schools to understand the effect of, our timeline in terms of, we really go to print in January before voters vote on a budget in March. And so I don't think the schools necessarily understood that we really need, we finalize our numbers in December before school starts the following August, September. And I think, the schools never had that understanding. I think most people didn't have that understanding. I mean, families moving into the area would have no reason to know that. So I think it was just an educational moment that sort of came out of that community committee. And I think it would be helpful, certainly as we move past the quarantine to have, people coming to the meetings, but I think, having them listening to these meetings is certainly a good first step, just to understand the implications of, we built in 15 ghost kids into our budget. Every additional kid is going to be an extra, roughly $20,000 for us to educate. So, anyone can do the math and figure out, how quickly that's going to eat up the ghost kids, the tax stabilization fund, and so on. And we're all, every town in Vermont is hurting. Probably every town in the country is hurting. So, what we are going through, we are not unique in any means. It is what it is. And I think education and communication is important, and we'll get through it.
Randy, is there a cap on the number of kids that MEMS can take?
There's a cap on class sizes.
I'm curious, what happens if there are more kids that move into the area than the schools can take?
We've never faced that, so it's hard for me to answer it. I know that with, if we were to take in-district choice with Taconic and Green, So there's choice if students want to attend Dorset, MEMS, Floodbrook for middle school.
Right.
If they want to attend Manchester in 6th grade and they're already at 22, 23, 24 students, they would not be able to choose that because they're at capacity. So then they can look at other options.
Okay.
We have never faced a situation in which every class, like let's say every 6th grade class across the district is at capacity.
Well, and I do remember, Randy, and this goes back to like after 9/11, when there was an influx of people to the area that, MEMS had 2 kindergarten classes and then they bumped it up to 3. And for a while, like there were 3 sections kind of moving through. And then I think families started to move back out again. And I don't know if maybe that's different because that's when MEMS was just MEMS and not part of T&G. So I don't know if that changes.
Our class structure changes all the time based on fluctuating enrollment patterns. So, and right now, as you can imagine, the BRSU is actively engaged in looking at our system as a whole because of what's happening with the decrease in money in the ed fund. So, we're concerned about FY21. We're more concerned about FY22 and FY23. So, what I don't have a sense is what the independent schools are doing regarding their budgets. And so there are a lot of factors that everyone is trying to balance and consider as far as responding to this. And I think we're going to learn a lot more over the course of the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the every 4 weeks giving us an update on the number of students that the BRSU is aware of, because I think that would be helpful. Just, for no other reason than to know it, communicate, prepare.
Sure, I can shoot for like the first of the month, asking Celeste to send an update.
That would be it would be helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm happy to do so.
So next meeting, we'll review the residency requirements based on Meredith's investigation, review enrollment numbers, and then, have a COVID update probably.
Randy, is there any sense that, I know this is kind of looking way out, but is there any sense that that Governor Scott is going to not open schools in the fall?
I see that as unlikely, but that's Randy Lowe personally saying that. We haven't got any definitive information yet. And at this point, the discussion is that we wouldn't know anything really, any guidance until mid July, maybe.
Okay.
Wow.
So that doesn't give us a tremendous amount of time.
And then is there any way that it would kick down to kind of the supervisory level? So it would come down to like BRSU making the decision whether or not they were going to open their schools within that district?
I doubt that it will be that
Granular?
clear. I've got a task force that I'm heading up for our schools in planning and programming. We're in phase 1. It's a 3-phase process. We're going to forge through with discussions and planning, even without guidance from the AOE, so that we have ideas and thought processes and models so that when we get the guidance, we're poised to respond to it.
And the other thing I'm curious about is in terms of Winhall students, do we know how many of them don't have access to internet or don't have computers and have been directly impacted?
I know for the 6 schools within the BRSU, the 6 public schools, I have that information for all of our students. And we have done everything we can to ensure internet access, connectivity, devices. I do not know. We did not engage in that conversation with the independent schools. My understanding was that they were doing that work on their own. So we didn't specifically seek out Winhall. We
Was it from a percentage standpoint? I'm just curious.
Low. We're like
Low?
fewer than
Oh,
10
good.
families.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better.
And we, and we're looking, as we look ahead, we're looking at purchasing devices that have hotspots attached to them. so that it doesn't become an issue if we end up in distance learning. So we're really trying to be proactive and remove that barrier to the maximum extent possible.
That's good. Good. I'm glad. Sorry. I just figured I'd ask.
No, it's important. There are so many infrastructure questions. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I have a friend who's a teacher, and she said that when she was in school, they did a case study on, internet access, and Vermont was the state that they studied because apparently we have an awful lot of kids who not only don't have internet, but they don't have access to the internet, period.
Or the internet they do have access to isn't sufficient for
like
video conferencing. That's very common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bandwidth isn't there.
Yeah.
It's still, a lot of it's still DSL. I mean, DSL is 20-year-old technology, and there's just no incentive for the providers to put in fiber optic because, I mean, we looked at, just to give an example, I mean, there's 3 houses on our road, and the cost to each house to do a fiber optic down a quarter mile of road was like 20 grand per house.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's it was like $60,000 to do that whole thing. And they're not gonna, so the only way that's ever gonna happen is if it gets subsidized. But I think that the whole situation at least is a great laboratory for finding out in the field, like what works and what doesn't. I mean, I'm sure people have had theories for years about, how to do remote learning. And it's like, you're never going to get a better chance than this to find out who's right.
Yeah, exactly. And how to make it better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm happy to hear that there's so few families within, our community that really weren't able to connect one way or the other. That makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else?
Not on my end.
All right.
We'll keep you all updated though.
I think I think we did really well tonight. These are challenging times, and complicated all the more by every day is literally a new day, and it's all so new. We're still trying to get information, and we'll just take it as it comes and do the best we can.
I have one more question. So my tenor is up at the end of this school year.
Well, no, like you run for re-election next March.
Oh, okay. So I have
Till
time.
March.
Great.
All right. Next meeting date is September.
Yeah, and you may find, I was just thinking about that date as I saw it there. Once we get July 1st and August 1st numbers, you may want to schedule an additional meeting in August.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So we can figure that out. I mean, again, like I still don't know what my August schedule is going to be like because June's been canceled, July's been canceled, and either August is going to be jam-packed or it's going to be similarly quiet, depending.
Right.
I'm doing nothing. A lot of kayaking.
Okay. Well, maybe what we can do is when we get to that point, Randy can send out a list of dates, and then we can each reply individually to Randy what dates were available, and then she can set the meeting from there. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Happy to do so.
All righty. Thank you.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All righty.
Thank you.
Guys.
Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.